Hi there, this is Mike back with another video. This time I'm bringing you a full game, which is the first time. And the primary reason is because we have a team match going between the Billerica Chess Club and the Wachusett Chess Club. We played round one last night, and I was on board 4 against Jeff Caruso. We're going to play again next week. We'll switch colors. So let's see if we can get this going. I played e4. And Jeff played knight f6. So about 3 or 4 weeks ago or so, I played George Mirjanian in an Alekhine, and it was fine, but I didn't feel in the mood to risk getting overextended. In the game against George, I played fine until about the worst move I could find of the 3 candidates I had, and then it was curtains. So considering it's a team match, I thought, well, let's approach this a little differently rather than chase that knight around. And so I played knight c3, and Jeff followed up with e5. So we could be headed to Vienna game. Maybe we'll get it somewhere else. We'll see what happens. I played bishop c4, and he played bishop c5. We're already not going to be able to get a Evans Gambit because of the C pawn still being blocked by the knight. So I thought, well, he didn't try to pin my knight, so I'm going to just go ahead and develop with the idea that maybe he'll play d5 and I'll have to think about what's going on the king side. So I played knight f3 and he played d6. So it looks pretty solid for black, probably pressure on the king side. But I have to say that at this point, I wasn't sure where I was going to castle. I had some visions of maybe playing f4 later after queenside castling. And so I thought it's a little too early to decide. I didn't want to play a gambit. Like I said, because of the team format, I didn't want to just get a little loose and have things fizzle out and be a pawn down and squeezed by Jeff. Jeff's over 1900, so I don't think it was worth it, the risk. So I played d3, and Jeff played bishop e6. Probably I should take that bishop, but I didn't really want to give him the f pawn coming toward the center. So instead, I backed up my bishop to b3. And after I did this, I took a little while on this, probably 3 or 4 minutes. I got to thinking that, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that because now he can capture my bishop. I'll probably take back with the a pawn, and I'm probably not going to castle queenside. So point is, I left my castling decision up to Jeff. It probably was a bad idea. Jeff continued pretty rapid development. He's got 4 pieces out with knight b to d7. And at this point, we've both used about the same amount of time. It was game 90 with a 10-second delay, and we're both at around a minute 17. An hour and 17. That makes a difference. So now I'm looking at the board, and I'm thinking, all right, well, what should I do? I kind of thought maybe I'd pin his f6 knight with my bishop, and then move my queen up. And if he hadn't taken my bishop on b3, I would exchange and then castle long. But that's a little slow, and I thought, well, maybe a better idea would be to support being able to push the d pawn. It's still a little slow, but my idea, which I'm not so sure is very good now, was to move the knight over and then the knight up to g3 in case Jeff got any visions of maybe changing his mind and pinning here, and that way we would be headed toward a bishop for knight trade, which seemed pretty good to me, but again, kind of slow and requires him to cooperate, which I wasn't expecting, but I was just kind of trying to be flexible. And so, yeah, that's exactly what I did. And unfortunately, he beat me to the punch because he played d5. And that's a pretty good move, I think. It, it, delays the decision between the bishops. it gives him a chance to capture on e4 twice, and I'm down a pawn. He could also push to d4, and I might have to play c3, but I'm feeling like it's sort of the bad side of a French defense all of a sudden, and I'm not feeling very comfortable, and we're on move 7. So I started thinking more and more, and right now we're at an hour and 12 each. And so I decided, all right, well, let me just play the knight to g3 so I can cover the pawn. And then Jeff played c6. So I was not likely to take the d5 pawn at all. So c6, I thought maybe was designed to bring the queen to b6, which would encourage me to castle short to cover f2. And so I thought, I'm going to be a little slow castling long, so I'm going to get castling over with. Get a bishop move away from being pretty well connected on the back rank and kind of safe. And Jeff delayed any queen sorties by castling himself. It took a little longer though, so now we're at an hour and 6 for me and an hour for Jeff. Still pretty fair. We've got a long way to go. We're only on move 9. So now I started thinking, well, I'm a little blocked up here in the center. I could reposition this bishop to c2, and that would support the e-pawn. Maybe it starts to look a little more like Ruy Lopez, but I'm way down in space, so I'm not all that comfortable. So I did play c3 for that reason and to intercept a d4 move. But he played the flexible rook e8. And so, he's a queen move away from having his rooks connected. He's got pretty good positions for all his pieces. And at this point, I was actually standing behind my chair, and I happened to notice that I could take the e5 pawn, and if he takes back, I could play d4 and fork his pieces to get the piece back. And I was debating between that and knight to g5, where I can get the bishop for the knight, but he can also then either lift the rook or take back with the f-pawn and then reposition back to the f-file. And neither of those appealed to me. I had actually considered playing knight g5 a move earlier, but then when he played rook e8, I decided that I didn't really want to go for that sortie. And instead, I did play knight takes e5. After the game, we were talking about the game. Jeff said that he didn't think that move was possible, but as I said, I'm lacking in space. He's got a really good bind on the center. I felt that I'd better not wait around for a guy who's a better player to suffocate me. He's got 2 bishops aiming toward my king side. His knights have plenty of maneuvering room, and he hasn't committed many pawns, so to forward progress. So he could pretty much choose any plan he wanted. So I decided I would put a little imbalance into the position. And in fact, Jeff did take the knight, and I played d4. So at this point, I have to think, well, which piece do I want? The bishop, the black king bishop, was bothering me a little more in the sense that like I said earlier, I wanted to consider f4 and maybe get a little bit of space on the king side. Maybe I could encourage a couple pawn moves forward. My bishop on b3 would maybe have a little better scope as a result. And so that was my argument for taking his bishop. The argument for taking the knight would be that it might be able to go to c4 and constrain that bishop's scope. It also might be able to just go to g6 or g4 and think about a way to support some kind of a push on the king side. And then I had considered, and Jeff actually played bishop to g4, which I didn't think was all that good. And the reason is because at first I thought, I'll play f3, and now he's got 3 pieces hanging. I'm down a piece, but I'll get 1 back. And if he snaps on f3 with the knight, I don't necessarily have to give back the rook. I can take back with the g-pawn. And so I've got a pawn here on f3 at the end of all that. And it doesn't look all that appealing in the sense that my g-file is open, guarded by a knight. It's not going to do a very good job defending against h5 and h4. But I'll have my piece back. I'll have some imbalance, and I don't know, maybe a little bit more play. At this point on bg4, we're at 50 minutes for me and 37 for Jeff. So it took a little while to unwind what he wanted to do, and I think it was starting to turn in my favor at that point. So I played f3, and Jeff took d takes e, which, again, I didn't like it too much. I can choose which piece I want still, and my decision was based on 2 things. I could keep this tension here for later, all the while blocking his bishop scope along this a7 to g1 diagonal. And if I take this bishop on g4, I might have a little trouble in a while because it'll bring a knight into play, and thankfully I've still got this bishop covering the e3 square, so I didn't feel too bad about any forks. But after I got looking at it, I realized that if he were to take back with this knight, and then he can bring his queen right up, and I've got some trouble. So I wasn't feeling that good about the decision, it turns out. So I decided to take on g4 because I didn't want to give him another tempo to take another pawn. So right now I've got 7 pawns. He's got 7 pawns. He's got a central passer. And I began to, this is around move 14. I started thinking more about what he has going. I probably didn't focus on that in the beginning. Not so much because there was a lot happening or not happening. I felt like we were still pretty early. It's only the 14th move, and things were fairly solid, but now they aren't. And so I started to focus on the queen coming to h4, this passed pawn, and the lack of scope for that bishop, and where I might go with it. So on move 14, Jeff backed up his bishop, and now my d4 pawn is pinned, and he does maintain that both pieces. I've got some space on the king side and the f-file I could make use of, but I'm a little more concerned about taking care of that e4 pawn before it gets rolling, because if I have to block it with my queen, I'll probably just get overloaded, and it would be easy to trip over my position. So I decided to play g5 with the idea that I could hit f7 with check and win the exchange after I get this guy out of the way. But like Jeff mentioned, that was probably my best plan to win an exchange. It would require me hiding my king over an h1. And I kept thinking to myself, I told him, I haven't made any really loosening, time-wasting pawn moves like a3 or h3, and I really wanted to avoid taken time out to move the king. And so I decided that if I could adjust the position of his knights by making piece moves, I might be doing better. So he took the F knight and played it to D7. Obviously, he's got a home on G6 for the other one if he needs it. And I know he expected me to play my king to H1. So on move 16, I decided to eliminate this pawn. Now he does have a discovered check, but I can collect it or take the knight back with the. He has a check, and he'll discover an attack on the knight. I can take back with the queen and cover it, so that wasn't a problem. And suddenly, I kind of like the scope of this knight. I looked for a really long time. Well, we're down to half hour for me, and we're already down to 6 minutes for Jeff. He took a long time in this whole last couple of moves. So I had time now to contemplate whether or not I had any sacrifices by knight f6 check, where this knight might take and I can take back with the g-pawn, or the g-pawn would take and I would take back with the g-pawn. Obviously, it's not supported well enough, so I need to figure out a way to get something else into the game. And so I opted for bishop f4. Oops, sorry, his move. He got out of the way. Oh, hold. Ah, right. As he told me after the game, he was worried about king h1, so he covered f7 with his rook f8 move, at which point I played bishop f4. He tucked back to g6, and I played bishop d6. So I'm going to get the exchange. Right now I'm feeling like it's a fairly comfortable position. I have a knight in the center of the board and two bishops aiming at his king side. All that tension and congestion that we had by around move 10 is gone. In the worst case, even if I couldn't win this exchange on f8, I'd considered backing up either the knight or the bishop to c5. It would have resulted with pawn eventually going there. Not all that appealing, but it would have relieved any of the play that his bishop had. The trouble is, if I did that, he might go to c7, and now he's back alive again. So in response to bishop d6, Jeff was quite concerned about f7, and he played knight h8. He's feeling, I think, fairly cramped here. Sometime I'd like to see my queen come to g4, where it attacks this knight. The knight doesn't have all that much scope except back to b8. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm starting to advance an attack in such a way that he's going to start having his pieces overloaded or have a lack of coordination. I also considered whether or not I ought to run my h-pawn to try to tweak these kingside pawns, but I thought, again, like the king move, it's going to be a little slow. And so at this point, I had 16 minutes and Jeff was under a minute, and so I went ahead and took the exchange, and his options are not the greatest. He can take back the queen, king, or knight. If he takes back with the queen, I kind of like the idea of getting my queen over to g4. It gives me a tempo on his knight. He either has to move it back or protect it, maybe with the rook. But again, it's kind of congested. And while he was working out that detail, he ran out of time, so flagged, and I ended up winning the game. It was fairly satisfying. I don't think I played great in the beginning, but I did make some fairly active plans and moves, so I was pretty happy about that. We were playing a 7-board match, 2 rounds. we'll alternate colors next week. So Jeff will have white and I'll have black. Wachusett won on boards 1 and 2 and 4, and then Billerica won two boards, and there were 2 draws. So I'll now that I've entered the game, I'll go ahead and I'm going to turn on the engine and see what happens. Oh yeah, +6. It feels, well, I mean, he's got to take back my bishop with something, so it's still down here. You can see +8, 9 points. It's fairly solid. I want to go back to where I think I began to go awry. Right here, pretty even game, right? Where black is equalized. 0.13 is 0.3 is kind of meaningless to a person. And if I show the lines, it's saying that I ought to just take this bishop. Well, let's just do it, and then take back, and then knight a4. So, you know, it feels like your white is doing something, but really not much is resulting from it. Black drops back, and then do I take it and open up the A file for black? That doesn't seem too appealing. Back to knight b d7. So castle, h3. So useful moves, a little bit of waiting, king safety. Not much to speak of, but better than knight to e2. And then another spot I was interested in was c3, whether the ability to reposition my bishop was a factor. So again, pretty even, a little bit toward black, but okay, so you wait long enough, and this is, see here, Stockfish 10 on chess.com. I don't know why, but it'll say something different than Lichess's version of Stockfish 10. In any case, it's hard to feel bad about an equal position after in the 10th move. And then the other turning, the next one was I took the E pawn. So yeah, look at that. Half a pawn for black. Jeff was right. It's probably not doable. And then the analysis follows. Well, there you go. Rather than go on this bishop's dance over here to g4, he can actually either take back a pawn, or as he mentioned in the game, he could just recover the pawn with bishop takes d4. Oh, okay, so you learned something. I've said before that you can't really go by the engines because it's impossible for us to distinguish between 0.2 and 0.3. But obviously that's not the continuation, because 1.6 is in a long haul, fairly good position for white. And then the next position I wanted to check out was right here, bishop. Where are we? Bishop g4. Yeah, so about a pawn advantage, which is the material, but like I said, I felt like it could get kind of loose, but I went ahead and played f3. That's the only good move for white. I had considered moving my queen over here to c2, but I thought, why move away from the action? As I said, I was a little concerned with this kind of area with black's pieces coming in, so I didn't want to move my queen further away. Okay, so it's Stockfish says maybe back off, let the center resolve itself, and then keep playing. Okay, so this d takes e4 is probably where it goes sideways. You know, the evaluation basically doubles white's advantage. A little tension has come out of the position. I've got my queen covered with the bishop and the rook, so I'm not too concerned about any pin that might be coming along the d file, trading queens at the moment. So I felt pretty good, and so yeah, taking the the bishop on G4, bishop backs up. Pretty good plan. Okay, so that's probably another idea. I probably could have gone ahead with H3, solidified this, but like I said, I was trying to tweak his pieces in such a way that maybe he could become a little uncoordinated. And I really wanted to play actively, because I think if I didn't, I would have been a lot worse off. Okay, then the last one is right here, knight takes E4. And okay, so King H1 is in one of the lines over here. So the best black line is to try to get rid of this D4 pawn, at which point I guess it looks like maybe, well, there's a lot of choices. The difference between 4 and +5 is, again, probably meaningless to me. I think it's a question of, well, what kind of a position do you want to play? I don't really want to see, he doesn't have a white bishop anymore, so I'm not too concerned about a knight coming in here and maybe having to give up an exchange to a discover check from F2. And so, yeah, maybe G6 would look kind of good. I don't know. Hard to say. We didn't get that far. Okay, so this is going to be up on my YouTube channel. You guys hopefully will check it out, offer some comments. I'll do it again next week. We're trying to document the match, so this is a contribution toward that. So anyway, thanks for watching, and see you next week.